For this session, I am joined by the animator and editor of the first film you watched today, which is Scalp Deep, and that's Naseba Bagalaliwo. And we're also with the director of A Handful of Dates, Hashim Hassan, the producer of A Handful of Dates as well, Mamdou Sali, and one of the writers of the legend of Lwanda Magere, Justus Macharia. So I'll ask each of them a few questions, and to all the people who are watching, please start sending in your questions already. I'll be happy to ask your questions as well. I'll start by speaking to Naseba, whose film won an award today at the Zeitenplatz Festival in Vienna. Congratulations on that, Naseba. Let's talk about your film. Really great short script. Could you tell us about this project and how it came to be? Because as far as I know, initially it was supposed to be a documentary. Could you tell us how it then progressed into becoming an animated film?
Thank you very much, Sharon. Yes, my film was initially slated as a documentary. I applied to the cultural grant at the Goethe Institute and submitted a proposal to make a documentary about women in Uganda with short hair. And so that was the initial idea, but then the lockdown hit and I had to adapt that idea. And so because I was here in quarantine alone, I tried to see how I could best adapt the idea on my own because I was at home alone. And so I started learning how to do 2D animation, and I looked for free tools that I could use because I didn't have much of a budget left at that point. And so that's where I came across the app that I used to make the film. And so I taught myself the 2D animation. I made my own stylus pen using an old sort of Parker pen and a tooth, an earbud. And so I made my own stylus pen, and that's how I was able to draw on a borrowed iPad. And that's how I drew the film and animated it myself. And even all the music and the assets used in the film were free. I used them from Common Creatives because one of the ideas I wanted to explore making that film was being able to make filmmaking accessible and also animation accessible. So I used all free tools to make it. And yeah, so it was initially supposed to be a documentary, and then I thought how to adapt and translate it so that more people could see it and understand it. So I thought animation was a great tool to do that.
Yeah, it's really great. Your film is about Black women and their hair, and this is a conversation which is currently being talked about more and more, and your film actually shows that at the end, which is really great. But is there something particular you'd like to add to the conversation, something you'd hope for people to walk away with when they see this film?
Well, definitely for me, the idea is represented as about hair, but also the main theme of the film is about identity and how people perceive us, and especially how people perceive women and African women. And a lot of the time it's external. It's how we look, it's how we present ourselves in society, but it's also about how people question people's identity based on how they present themselves outwardly and not inwardly, not looking at our intellect, not looking at our skills, not looking at our capabilities. So there's also a strong theme of that in the film, which is what I wanted to get across. In addition to the idea of policing women's bodies, because here in Uganda as well, we have these laws about, or discussions about banning mini skirts, women dressing inappropriately or indecently. And also for me as a Muslim woman and as an African woman, these are issues around policing our bodies, which we have to explore and discuss. And especially for young women to be able to discuss them early on and to recognize that these are things they need to be thinking about in life, because the ideas are constantly projected on us based on how we look or how we present ourselves. So that's definitely a strong theme as well in my film.
Okay. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, Hashim Hassan, the director of A Handful of Dates. So this film is an adaptation of the short story by a great Sudanese author called Tayeb Salih. And what particularly drew you to this story that got you to inspired to adapt it as a film, A Handful of Dates?
Yeah, so I initially read Tayeb Saleh in university. I was a Middle East Studies major, and I read his novel, Season of Migration to the North. And what I appreciate about Saleh is his exploration of themes dealing with identity crisis in the context of Sudanese Western, the Sudanese Western relationship, or the North African Western relationship. I myself grew up Sudanese Mexican American in the US, and you know, oftentimes you can have, you know, with an immigrant parent like my father, sometimes there is you know, conflict and tension there in terms of how to kind of be your own person, but at the same time still kind of adopt certain cultural norms that maybe came from, you know, your father's or parents' generation. And so that's what I was interested in exploring with, you know, Saleh's work. And A Handful of Dates was kind of a short exploration of these themes, something that we could adapt into a short film. And also it was an opportunity to go back to Sudan, a country I hadn't seen in 23 years since the military coup that brought Omar al-Bashir to power in '89. So it was both an exploration of my Sudanese identity and an exploration of these themes that of identity crisis that were kind of present in my life growing up in the US.
Oh, that's great. I love how at the end we see Mahmoud free himself from his father's view. It's such a great ending. How have audiences taken it? Are they getting the message of it? How has it been screening it in Sudan? What has that been like?
Yeah, for the most part, it's been very well received. I think in terms of the ending, because we took a departure from the original short story and went with a more ambiguous ending, you know, there was, you know, sometimes you did have people wanting a more clear ending in terms of why he threw up. And I think, you know, us kind of departing from the original short story kind of raised some questions in terms of, you know, what we intended with that ending. But overall, it's been very well received in Sudan. Yeah, we're very happy with the reception it's been receiving overall.
Okay, that's great. Mahmoud Sali, the producer of A Handful of Dates, I wanted to ask you about the production value of the film, which really stands out. It's really beautiful. The locations are great. The photography is outstanding. Could you tell us about the creative process behind getting different people to rally behind one vision of this film specifically? Mamdou, sorry, are you there?
Let me unmute. Here we go.
Oh.
Is that better?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for having us here. It's really our pleasure to be a part of your festival and to be in this Q&A with you. So we're very happy to be here. Thank you. Yeah. So in terms of the process of just producing the film and just putting everything together, we wanted to, we were very keen, very careful about having Sudanese people work on the film. So we wanted this as much as possible to be an authentically Sudanese film that was made in Sudan, shot in Sudan. Most of the funding came from Sudan, and we wanted to have the premiere in Sudan. So we wanted it to be as authentically Sudanese as possible. And so it was the film company in Sudan called Sudan Film Factory that really helped us with a lot of the resources in terms of putting the cast and the crew together. Excuse me. And so we got a lot of resources from them. We were able to connect with a lot of people, both for funding and for people that wanted to work with us on the film. A lot of the people worked free to fee, just kind of volunteered their efforts and their time to help make this vision come alive. It's truly a labor of love, like they say. But yeah, it was, you know, this film is a testament that in Sudan, there are the resources, there's the personnel, there's the some of the money available. Most of the film was funded from Sudan, and you know, you can find the crew, the cast, the actors. Those resources are available there in Sudan, and we were able to try to get the best that we can and have people that really were passionate about the story and wanted to work in it, to work together and to collaborate. And you know, they did a wonderful job. Everyone really did a good job at what they do.
Speaking of production, could you tell us about maybe a single really memorable day on set? Any standout day that you had while you were making this film? Something that stood out to you on one of the days?
Yeah, this is a famous story. It's kind of funny. It's a funny story. It's a pretty famous story in the making of this film, which is, so the donkey that Masoud has. So Masoud, who is the character that plays the poor farmer, he has a donkey with him in the story, and the donkey is supposed to be a really weak and fragile and old donkey. So he kind of mirrors Masoud in a way. It was just being kind of old and just really poor and such. So we had to cast the donkey. So the donkey was hard to find because you had to find a specific type of donkey. And so we tried really, really hard, and the casting director and everyone worked really hard to find this type of a donkey. So we found them and we shot one of the scenes with them. And then when the final scene came and we had to do a scene in the marketplace, the donkey had disappeared. He really just went out. We don't know where he went, but he just went and he disappeared. And so we had everyone in the village looking for this donkey, going around the village, and we're trying to shoot. And we can't shoot because we can't find the donkey. And we can't just use any donkey because we have to find the same donkey that was there. So eventually, after just a lot of looking around and a lot of drama to find the donkey, we found him. And we brought him in like a pickup sort of a truck, and it was really funny because he made a grand entrance into the set as we were waiting for him to shoot, and everyone started to applaud the fact that the donkey came back. And it was very memorable, the whole episode with the lost donkey on set.
That's a great story. Thank you for telling it. Justus Makaria, writer of The Legend of Lwanda Magere.
Recording in progress.
I will ask you some questions which are coming from the audience already. Someone's wondering, is this story based off a true legend or an oral myth? And they add, the whole shadow thing is so creative, loved it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'll say hello to everyone, and thank you for inviting me. And on behalf of the whole Legend of Lwanda Magere crew, I think we all say thank you. To answer the question, yes to both. It is based off of a legend and an oral myth. So the Legend of Lwanda Magere is based off of a Luo myth about the great Lwanda Magere, who kind of, just as has been shown in the movie, is given powers by a great creator, and he uses them initially to do good, and then his kind of a pride gets in the way and he loses his power, and he turns into a stone. So actually, if you come to the Kenyan side of Lake Victoria, you actually will find the stone that the Luo people believe is Lwanda Magere when he sort of drops down and turns into a stone. The stone still exists, and you have to, when you go there, you have to give an offering to the ancestors and the spirits. So yes, it's based off of a oral Luo myth.
Okay, great. Someone else is wondering, why did you tell an African story using Western lenses or techniques? What was the initial language they spoke?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part of the statement, of the question? I missed it.
Okay, why did you tell an African story lenses or techniques, what language was spoken? That's how I interpret the question.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'm still struggling a bit, but if the question is why, did we use Western techniques to make the film? Was that the question?
And yes, and language. I think English, yeah. Wait, this in English.
No, it wasn't in English, actually. It was in Luo, which is the original language that the myth is based on, but it has English subtitles. So I don't know if they watched the version that we made, but there is, it's originally in Luo, even the language that it's delivered in, unless maybe they watch like a version with English. But when I'm not the director, but when I was in the production, the original language was Luo. That's what the actor spoke. I'm a bit unclear about the first question about a Western technique. I mean, it's animation, which is, in my mind, universal. So I don't know what specifically they're referring to when they talk about the Western technique. But I think what I can say about what the directors did, because again, I'm not the director, but I think what was great was that the whole team was Kenyan, and they really tried to recreate the aesthetic of some old, like Luo African paintings, and even like some the textures that you could find on like pots and fabrics, things like that. That was very interesting. So yeah, I think I would say that I think the team really tried to take animation and present it in a way where it was really influenced by African landscapes and culture and history and all that stuff.
Sorry, my network went off completely. Sorry. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Okay. I think I'll go on to the next question. I wanted to know, would you consider this story to be like a reflection on society? Is there any reflection that this kind of story would have on society today, according to you?
Is this for Legend of Lwanda Magere?
Yes, for Legend of Lwanda Magere.
Oh, I think because I was brought in, I mean, I was brought in as the co-writer, so I was not the first one to sort of touch the script. But I think when I was brought in, Kwame Nyong'o, who's the director and writer of the film, what he was really interested in was to talk about kind of some of the conflicts that he had experienced from lowlands. The sort of genesis of him making the film happened just after the 2008 election crisis in Kenya, where there was a lot of sort of inter-ethnic conflict. And one of the things about the film is that it is about Nandi versus Luo conflict. So, you know, if anyone knows anything about Kenya, the Nandi and the Luo, they're kind of neighbors. And there's always been a bit of this like inter-ethnic conflict between the two, which dates back even to this story. And Kwame's brother had been, I think it's his brother or cousin, had sort of been a victim of sort of that post-election crisis when there was a lot of inter-ethnic conflict. So I think this was kind of like his entry into that subject, or like maybe his way of maybe talking about how those conflicts kind of seed themselves in our culture. And yeah, I think he did a good job of sort of boiling it down to like the human element of showing how the sort of like pride and conflict can sort of overcome a person if it becomes like all you're basing yourself around. So that's what I think. I don't want to speak too much for Kwame, but that was what we kind of discussed when I came into the project.
Okay, thank you so much. Naseba, this question is to you. Someone is saying the titles of your chapters are really interesting. How did you come up with them?
So the titles of my chapters actually come from a Thomas Hardy novel called Test of the D'Urbervilles, which was one of my favorite books growing up. And so that's where they come from. Because the book itself is about a Victorian woman who's struggling within a society and the restrictive nature of the society that she's living in. In a sense, she's ahead of her times. And so when I was thinking about the idea, I thought, what influences do I have in my life which I can relate this story to, and which are part of my own experiences? And that's how I decided to integrate those titles, because they felt very reflective of the story that I was telling as well. I mean, in Tess, it's a story about her purity as a woman, and so her virginal purity in society. And in this, it's about how we walk through society and what norms are expected of us as women in terms of how we look and how we move in this world. And so that's where those titles came from. There's some of the chapters from Thomas Hardy's books.
Great, thank you. We're short on time. I think I'll ask this question, which someone submitted in the chat, which is to all the panelists. They're asking, how important is representation in film, particularly for African filmmakers? I think we'll start with you, Hashim. How important is representation?
Yeah, for me, growing up in the US, there was always very, I grew up on Hollywood films, and I only got into international cinema later, but there was always a very narrow depiction of both African, peoples and Arabs in terms of, Western cinema. And, I think it's important that we tell our own stories. And luckily now, I think more so than in the past, we have an opportunity to do that with more support. But growing up as a Westerner, the idea of, what it meant to be African, and growing up, there weren't too many stories that I was familiar with growing up. And so, yeah, it's really important that, we have the capacity to tell our own stories and use our own voice. Otherwise, other people will do it. And, historically, it's kind of contributed to very narrow conceptions of what it means to be African, or in this case, Sudanese, Arab, Muslim, African, all that. So, yeah, that's what I would say on that.
Thank you. Namdu?
Yes, thank you. Definitely very, very important. One of the visions that we had for this film was that we saw that there was a need in Sudan for Sudanese cinema to really reflect an authentic view and representation of Sudanese culture, heritage, traditions, things like that. History, literature, through the author. And, there's just a need for that in the international market, in the international sphere. So I think for any culture, it's very important that you reflect yourself back to yourself, and to be able to learn from that, and to be able to ask the questions and have conversations and to discuss. And that's how progress is made. That's how we have progress, by looking in and reflecting on who we are and making the necessary changes. And so for us specifically, in terms of this film, we really wanted to make something that was authentically Sudanese, that really showed what the authentic culture was like. And, this type of a film really lended itself for this type of a story. So yeah, it's very, very important. And I really hope and wish that in Africa in general, that we're able to really do that and harness that power of storytelling and filmmaking to reflect ourselves back to ourselves and to the world. Definitely.
Thank you. Justice?
Great. I think, speaking specifically for animation, I think historically animation, and even presently, is like a very expensive medium in comparison to many other sort of artistic mediums. So it has always been very difficult for sort of many people on the continent, and definitely in Kenya, to sort of make it within that industry and kind of make stuff that, that can fill our TVs and fill our time. But what's great, I think, is that not only are we now seeing the stories being told, but also being told by African peoples, because sometimes you would get instances where like capital is coming in, but the people who are making the stories are not the people who the stories are representing. So like specifically for a film, it was exciting to go to an office and just see like, a whole room of Kenyan people, animators, background designers, directors, writers, all of them, invested in this one story. So it's great. I think it's great to see people in front and behind the camera. And I think for all of us, we just continue to do more, and we're the ones who have to like spearhead the change that we want to see. So it's very important to me. So yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Naseba.
Yes, I think I'll echo some of what everybody said. I think it's extremely important, especially like Justice said, also within animation. And I think also it's important as well to be cognizant of how we promote African culture, how we promote African filmmaking and package it, and also how we preserve our heritage. So while it's great that there are filmmakers and people making their films and getting recognition for that, it's also important to document those films, to write about them, and to archive what people are actually making, because a lot of our history, a lot of our heritage, a lot of our storytelling and our oral storytelling abilities and history gets lost in translation and gets lost from a lack of documentation and archiving of it. So it's also, while it's important to create and make, it's also important to preserve and archive.